Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining the webinar today. We are talking about paradigm work and especially the work package 1. Before we continue, I'd like to introduce you to today's speakers and the core team. My name is Chi Pakarinan from The Synergist, and together with my colleague Nicholas Brook and our co-leads Fabian Summers and Alexandra Mute from UCB, we would like to warmly welcome you joining us in this exciting webinar today. So today you will hear about our first work package that discusses the stakeholders' expectations and needs. And to dive into more details on the results of the online survey, we have Suzanne E. from University of Oxford. And then after that, we will hear from Maria Jose Vicente Edo from the Institute of Aragon, who led the work in the modified Delphi methodology. In addition to them, we also have on the call our partners who led the focus group consultations from the 4 different organizations. So we have Ana Diaz from Alzheimer's Europe, Begonia Nafria from the San Juan de Dios Children's Hospital, Elisa Ferrer from Eurordis, and also Neil Bertelsen from HTAI, which is Health Technology Assessment International. They're here to also answer any questions that you might have towards the end of the webinar. So your mics are muted when you join the webinar. If you have any questions that come up during the presentations, please note them down and write them in the chat box, or in the end when we open the floor for questions, you can ask them then as well. The agenda is quite tight today. We only have 1 hour and we have a lot of information to go through. And this is now what we propose. So first we'll give you a very short introduction to what Paradigm is, just to get everyone on the same level. I know that we have a lot of people who have not been involved with Paradigm work before, so we want to give you the definitions that we will be talking about and also the aims and the work of Paradigm, the project itself. Then we will have a deep dive into the survey and focus group results presented by Suzanne, which will then lead us to the Delphi methodology and the results shared by Maria. After that, we'll open the discussion, open up for discussion and questions. So without further ado, I will hand it over to my co-lead, Alexandra Mute from UCB, to give you an introduction of Paradigm. Alexandra.
Yes, thank you, Chi. Thank you. Hi to everybody. Thanks a lot for joining to this webinar where we want to share with you some first results from a Paradigm. So I am Alexandra Moutet from UCB. UCB being a Belgian biopharma company. Next, and I will introduce you to what is this project of Paradigm. So Paradigm is a public-private project within what we call the IMI projects. IMI meaning Innovative Medicines Initiative, which is the world's biggest public-private partnership in the health sector, which is driven by in Europe, and which is funded half from public funding through the European Commission, and half from private funding from mainly pharmaceutical industry. Next slide, please. So, as I told you, it is that's why we have so many partners. I will not go, of course, in the details. There are more than 30 partners coming from the private sector, mainly pharmaceutical company, but not only, and also from the public sector. In the public sector, you find representative big patient organization or patient advocacy groups, academics, universities, and so on. So it's really, and also official bodies like we spoke about the HCAI, who was involved in this work package. So it is a project for 30 months, which is quite short for such a big initiative. Paradigm has the ambition, I would say, indeed, to change or to make a big enhancement in patient engagement, in change the paradigm of the patient engagement. Paradigm meaning also patient active in research and dialogues for an improved generation of medicines, meaning that the focus of the patient engagement within Paradigm is in the research and development space, and I will go more in details in that. It is a European project, and it is fueled by co-creation. We indeed, as it is about research and development, and as there's a big ambition, the project is, however, focusing on 3 specific stages that you see here. The first one is research priority setting, which is early in the development. Then you have the design of the clinical trial, which is really the development phase, when you have all the different clinical studies which are developed and how to increase patient engagement there. And there is also a specific focus on early dialogues with regulators and health technology assessment bodies, and insist that it is early dialogues. It's not about filing or discussing access at the end of the development. More close to the after the phase 3 or the end of development phase. It is really an early dialogue, which is really a big specificity of this dialogue. The objectives of the project, it is for each of those phases to develop processes and tools for patient engagement that will support for all the stakeholders, and that's one. The other challenge of this project, it is that we have numerous stakeholders, as you have understood. Of course, the patients and their representatives, but also the sponsors of the different the different research and development, who can be public or private, and also the public bodies as the regulators and health technology assessments. And also overall, having in mind that this project is short, I said 30 months, it's also to develop a sustainability roadmap for patient engagement, to begin with on those 3 phases, and with the ambition to be broader, knowing that patient engagement is really a key trend now around those topics. Next slide, please. From the beginning, we speak a lot about patient engagement. And in fact, if you look at the literature across the world, there is no one definition of patient engagement, which is one of the reasons which brings sometimes some confusion when you speak about that. Very interestingly, I think that was on the trends since the beginning. Paradigm has set its definition of patient engagement, which you can read here, which is really effective and active collaboration with patients, patient advocates, patient representatives, and their carers. And insist on the word of collaboration, because it is much broader than interaction or involvement. So it is an active collaboration in the processes and decisions within the medicine life cycle, and we'll come back to that. There is, of course, you need to have specific processes, transparent processes to conduct patient engagement, but the goal is also that this patient engagement drives some decision and have a weight in the decision-making process around research and development. And again, it should not be addressed in a silo way. So it is the patient engagement, the patient perspective in the decision-making, but which should be relevant also with all the different stakeholders, as we have said. Stakeholders meaning the medical community, the research community, the academics, the public bodies, etc., and which is really, I say, the challenge and also the interest of this kind of project, to have everybody to have the ambition to align as much as possible across the different stakeholders on a shared interest. Next slide, please. So the rationale for choosing those three stages for research and priority settings, it is really that patient perspective are largely untapped at this stage. while in fact they are critical at this stage because it will drive all the work and the strategy of research and development. So how we have a truly patient perspective on what are the unmet needs that are targeted for the research and development initiative and strategy to be developed. For the design of the clinical trials, it is more today a more one, but it is a critical one as well, to have a truly patient perspective and patient input, including in the decision making on the design of those trials. And very importantly, and again, this is the specificity of this project, have a broader patient view on that. When I say a broader patient, it is a broader type of patients, and deliberately, Paradigm has gained the input and the involvement and engagement with vulnerable patients, being with some deficiency, for example, and this will be presented later, and also it can be also, even though maybe not so vulnerable, also with young patients, and also with patients who are not affiliated to a big patient organization. So it's more lay patients, how also to get their perspective. And through those targeting all this broad population of patients, of course, it brings new insights to support new tools and processes. The early dialogue, again, I insist on the word of early, because here again, patient engagement is quite is challenging, but it's also quite new to have it such early dialogue, including patients with the active engagement of patients from the regulatory and the health technology assessment bodies. Why, in fact, again, here also at this point, it is critical to have the right perspective for the further developments of the strategies. Next slide, please. So it is a complex project, which has been organized in 7 work streams. We are the first one. That's why we are the first one able to share the specific results. And in fact, by focusing on assessing what are the preferences and the needs of those different participants in the research and development aspect, to feed the other work streams who will develop, assess more the gaps, and develop the relevant tools and processes that needs to enhance. Thank you. I have here is the short introduction, and so I hand over back to you, Shi.
Thank you, Alexandra. So, as described here, Work Package 1 was the starting point for Paradigm. And just to recap on what we did here in Work Package 1, our aim was to understand the relevant stakeholders' expectations and needs and their preferences for more meaningful, effective patient engagement. We also wanted to involve those relevant stakeholders in throughout the project where we could. And here in the box that you'll see all those stakeholders that responded to the survey or were otherwise involved in giving their input in the meaningful patient engagement. So we have the patient community, including carers and patients organizations. We have from academics, research funders, policymakers, industry, healthcare professionals, and also regulators and payers, even though payers were not our main target group if we think about the 3 decision-making points that Paradigm focuses on. To reach those objectives, we divided the work in 2 stages. Firstly, to collect a big amount of data through online survey, and knowing that not everyone can access the online survey, we also created 4 focus group consultations that were led by the 4 organizations that I introduced earlier. So for the group with people with dementia, the focus group consultations was organized by Alzheimer Europe. For young people, it was done by San Juan de Dios Children's Hospital. For rare disease patients, the consultation was organized by Eurordis. And for the health technology assessment bodies, it was organized by the HTA International. So without further ado, I will hand it over to Suzanne E. from the University of Oxford to tell you more about what we did and the results that came from these online survey and focus group consultations. Suzanne?
Thank you, Chi. I hope everyone can hear me okay. My name is Suzanne E., and I work with primary care health sciences in the University of Oxford. Today I'll be covering the online survey results and some of the focus group consultations that Chi covered just a second ago. So what we conducted the survey from June to July 2018. It was conducted in English, and then a translated version of the survey was done in 23 EU languages. So in total, we had 372 English language responses, and then 169 that were non-English responses. And those were primarily conducted in 13. The total respondents were based in 48 different countries. So the focus groups were conducted from June to October 2018. And as you can see, there are 11 people with dementia and 10 carers. We had 14 young people between 15 and 18 years old. And we had 9 patient representatives from rare disease consultations, and then 11 representatives from HTA agencies who came from, I believe, not just Europe, but also North America. Next slide, please. So the patient community is grouped as patient and carers, patient advocates, and patient organizations. Now for the respondents, industry was by far the highest, 178 respondents at 32.9%. Or I'm sorry, the patient group was actual, patient community was higher, 37% with 200 respondents than industry. The other groups were under 56 respondents and below, and they're quite low in comparison. And then we had this other group, and that group consisted of carers, consultants, medical charities, privacy experts, industry associations, and some people who considered themselves hybrids. And so they might have had one role in 2 different areas. So like say a research funder and a patient organization member, something like that. So there are quite a few there, 29. Chi, if you could go to the next slide, please. Okay, so from what we understood, we asked about the current impression of patient engagement versus the ideal expectation of patient engagement. And this is on a 0 to 100 scale. And so we took the means and we decided to look at them. And the highest mean was at clinical trials, 33.82 for current expectations, current impressions, I'm sorry. And then the lowest mean was at pricing and reimbursement, and that was at 20.49. The ideal expectation, the highest mean was at early dialogues, which was 72.19. And then the lowest mean was at licensing of medicines at 62.74. So the largest gap was actually between the current and ideal was at early dialogues. So there's quite a lot of expectation in early dialogues to improve patient engagement processes. Next slide, please. And so industry, we asked about overall patient engagement experience. Industry had the highest counts at 1,458. Then came patient advocates and patient organizations at 1,129. Then research and academia at 527. So the lowest reported patient engagement experience was from regulators, policymakers, HTA, and research funders. And we had some from other and quite a few from research and academia and healthcare professionals. But yes, we did have quite low reported experience from the sort of further downstream processes and those bodies. Next slide, please. So we asked respondents about their previous patient engagement experience with the patient community. And these are at 3 different decision-making points and on 3 different decision-making levels. So you'll see there's informing, consulting, deciding. And informing is to give one's opinion and perspective, but no channel for feedback. Then you have consulting, which is to give one's opinion and perspective and the ability to provide feedback. And then you have decision making, which is the ability to give opinion, provide feedback, and make the final decision. So this question was in a matrix format, which allowed for multiple choice responses. And so at each indicated stage, you'll see that industry is quite highly engaged with patients in the patient community. And here you'll see it's at the research priority setting, it's highest at the consulting level than the informing level. And then it tends to drop off for the other groups, and you'll see that it's 11 reported experiences or below for the other groups, but then you see quite a few 0 counts for like HTA and regulators, policymakers at this point. So we'll go to the clinical trials design setting in the next slide. Okay, next slide, thank you. So at the clinical trial stage, you see the industry is again highly engaged at the consulting level. And then the response rates for the other stakeholder groups comes down to below 11 counts for patient experience with the patient community, or previous experience with the patient community. And there are quite a few holes at the deciding level, the informing level as well with the other stakeholders. Next slide, please. So we get to early dialogues. And again, industry is quite highly engaged at consulting and informing levels. Response rates for the other stakeholder groups is below 10 counts of patient previous experience with the patient community. The deciding level is quite, you'll see that for regulators, HTA, research funders, it's below 5. Next slide, please. So we gave 13 challenges that you might have experienced when you were involved with a different stakeholder group. And so here we've listed the top 5 challenges in the figure. The most reported challenge was patient input was not part of decision making for the total responses. However, when we broke this down, if you look at lack of shared vision, goals with other stakeholders, and communications were not clear and open, you'll see that patients and the patient community actually thought that these 2 challenges were much higher than patient input was not part of decision making. So there is a little bit of a difference between the other stakeholders and particularly the patient community. Next slide, please. So we asked about what were some of the desired outcomes of patient engagement, and we asked at the 3 different settings. So this figure shows the research priority setting, and the top desired outcomes here are when patients' needs are leading in the research agenda, when it results in new insights and new perspectives for policymakers, regulators, and research funders, and when researchers get better insight in the patient's journey. Okay, next slide, please. So we looked at the clinical trial design stage, and I think for here, by far, it was the desired outcome was when it results in more patient-relevant outcomes for the clinical trial. And then you come to 2 that are similar, when patients can share their experiences and increase knowledge of the clinician. And then the 3rd was when it leads to higher patient satisfaction during the trial. Okay, next slide, please. So when we get to the early dialogue stage, we have quite high counts for these 2. The one is when the voice of the patient is reflected in the decision. The second one was when patients' needs are better met. And then slightly lower in response was when it results in improving transparency and openness in decisions. Okay, so we asked all of the respondents what they thought was needed for more effective patient engagement. And I think by far all of the respondents said that they wanted a way to measure the impact of patient engagement. Here, slightly lower, the second and third responses were methods, materials, and information on how to do more effective patient engagement, and then methods to identify and evaluate where contribution would be more valuable. So we asked what could be done to increase patient engagement activities for the patient community specifically. And when we asked them, patients and patient advocates and organizations had slightly different responses to the kind of support that they would like. They did say that they would like a sort of one-to-one type support given directly. But when we asked further, the patient group was saying that they would like a person or group who has in-depth knowledge in that area. But then the patient advocates and organizations said they wanted to be involved with the actual stakeholders who are engaging in that patient engagement activity that they're interested in. So it's a slightly different type of support, but they're both involved in sort of this knowledge activity that they'd like, a training perhaps that they need for the support so that they can actually take part in this activity of interest. Next slide, please. So patient organizations specifically were asked about their preparedness as an organization in these 6 different areas. So we have internal processes, knowledge, information, and expertise, human resources, financial resources, managing competing interests, and then setting priorities in the PE strategy, patient engagement strategy. So respondents mostly stated that their organization is actually prepared, but they still need support. And the one place that was different was their financial resources. They said that they were not prepared and they did require much more support. Next slide. Okay. So we asked industry if they had a dedicated patient engagement function within the organization. Majority of the industry respondents said yes. And then we asked them how frequently they actually have corporate activities that are involved in patient engagement. It was quite regular at the clinical trial stage, but then when you get to the other two, they responded on an always to none scale, that it was sometimes part of their corporate activities for patient engagement. And so we also asked, we grouped together regulators, policymakers, HTA, research funders, and payers. And 12 out of 25 said they had a dedicated function. But when we asked them about how these patients and representatives are involved in the work, most of the responses were that they were not involved. And this was asking at the informing, consulting, and deciding levels. And despite that, at the 3 decision-making points that they were not involved, patients were not involved. Next slide, please. So we asked about measuring the impact of patient engagement to the same groups, industry, and then regulators, policymakers, HTA, research funders, payers, and healthcare professionals. And by overwhelmingly, everyone said that there was not any kind of metric or method that they used to measure impact of patient engagement. So there might have been a small minority who said that they do. So we asked for more information, such as, a way to contact them to find out what kind of materials they have, and to allow for the other work packages to conduct further research about what tools they might be using. Next slide, please. So we also asked about standard operating procedures, and industry by far has, they have some kind of standard operating procedure and it is used in practice, but equally they said also no, and that it should be established For healthcare professionals, we asked them the same, and for the most part, they do not have a standard operating procedure, and it needs to be established. Okay, so we get to the focus group findings, and we're talking about first we'll talk about the patient groups and more meaningful patient engagement. So the key items that came from those focus groups with patient groups are that we need to understand the voice of the person with the condition, and we need to include diversity of patients, and that we need to allow some kind of awareness so that patients are aware of what kind of patient engagement activities are actually out there so that they have an opportunity to get involved. So some of the things that could be done to reduce or will consider the 3 points that they've raised are to address myths, misconceptions surrounding the type of disease. So for instance, for people with dementia, the tendencies might be to focus on images of advanced types of dementia, assumptions that might be made about the ability to actually contribute. And then maybe misconceptions for young people might be that they're less willing or unable to contribute properly to patient engagement. And then also talking about equal opportunities. So we need to have some kind of accessibility needs that need to be met, as some of the patients say that they have much higher capability of being involved if it was in the morning or maybe in the evening or something like this when they're functioning highly. And so these kinds of things need to be addressed and I think adjusted for. And then talking about reasonable adjustments in terms of travel and accommodation, those kinds of support that they need for training sessions, financial support, compensation, and then making sure that information is accessible to them. I think these areas are very important for these types of patient groups. Next slide, please. And so we talked with HTA and about the early dialogue stage, and they talked about how some of the common challenges that you might run into are that patients are unable to make objective inputs. They said that some of the diseases that they might cover might be difficult to find the appropriate person who fits that profile. Sometimes details that they're covering might be too complex. They have a difficult time, perhaps, sharing that information with patients. Might be conflicts of interest that happen between industry and patient organizations. They just don't have the resources to manage all of this. And some HTA agencies might not understand why they need to engage at the early dialogue stage. So some of the things that they indicated that they needed were sort of ways to improve patient recruitment processes, or even establish them entirely because they might not be existent at the moment. Trying to get some kind of patient interview guidance to understand what they can do to bring patients in, talk to them further, and listen to their opinions. And then having some kind of minimum standards framework so that I think the HTA agencies who do have some kind of framework can share with perhaps agencies that don't have a framework at all, and then try to build something. I believe I have it till 12. I'm sorry, guys. Just a second.
Sorry for that. So we'll wait for Suzanne to come back to conclude on those findings. But while we wait, I wanted to clarify a little bit that, or provide actually more information on the creation of the online survey. We had the work started last year in March, and to start the work.
I'm sorry, Chi.
Yes.
I'm sorry, Chi. I need to go. Can you cover the rest? I have 2 slides left.
Okay. Yes, I'll do that. Thanks. Thanks, Suzanne.
I'm sorry. Thanks.
Thanks. So, as I was saying, we started to work in March, and to get to those questions that we asked at the in the online survey, which then fed to the questions and discussions that were had in the focus group consultations, were all co-created together within the Paradigm Consortium with our partners and with the other work packages to ensure that we actually have the kind of information that we need to move forward. In this preparation work, we also included patient representatives to get their opinion, to test out the pilot survey back in May last year, to make sure that it's all validated, easy to use, and easy to go through. So Suzanne was here describing the results of the focus group consultation with the HTA, the Health Technology Assessment Bodies. I think we got to the minimum standards framework. That was the kind of tool that was needed in order to help these bodies to do more patient engagement work. As you could see in the previous results, when we asked about the previous engagement with patient groups, this group of stakeholders had quite low previous engagement. So this is all the types of tools that were suggested to help increase that. Also, one of the findings from this focus group consultation was the lack of clarity on what type of patients to include at which time point, but also for which type of activity. That would also increase and help increase the chance, not the chances, but the instances of patient engagement that would happen in these early dialogues time points. To conclude all of this, we took the results of the survey as well as the focus group consultations and looked for the themes or the needs or expectations that really converged, but also the differences that we could see there. You will see here only 5 points. I would welcome you to take a look into the detailed reports as well, because there is a vast amount of information and recommendations from each of these focus groups that they develop from their consultations and the meetings. But just to boil it down to 5 points here for this webinar, it is crucial to have patient engagement throughout the medicine's development processes, not only in the most obvious so far, which is the clinical trial, but especially in these 3 time points that we are focusing on. There is desire for more patient engagement. That is obvious from both the focus group consultation and the survey. Although the patient community had slightly different take on what are the greatest challenges, it was not too far from each other. So it was more specific to the patient community to have specific challenges for them, and then the specific for the industry. But all in all, it all converged into 5 main challenges that had been reported out of the 13 that we suggested. Integration of patient engagement in these decision-making points is very important, and also reflecting how that input has affected or influenced the outcome is also important. So there is a need to support the patient engagement activities for all stakeholders, and in specific ways, that was what to do specifically and how to do it. And again, this is a very high-level conclusion. I will encourage you to go into more details to the reports, and we have the links at the end of the slides, where you will receive them after the webinar as well. Moving on to the second stage of the work, we took all those needs and expectations that resulted from the survey and the focus group consultations and took that as one of the background informations to feed into the Delphi methodology that was conducted by our partners, Paragon. And I'll have Maria to talk to you more about that. Maria?
Yes. Good morning, everyone. My name is Maria. I work for the Aragon Health Science Institute in Spain, and we were responsible for leading the Delphi process. The process started. The first thing we did was the development of the questionnaire. To develop the questionnaire, we took the results from the survey about stakeholders' needs and expectations, and also about the result from the focus group. It helped us for the questionnaire also to complement this information. What we did, we search, we look at other sources, we search for the literature in databases and in websites from patient organizations, private and public institutions, academics, universities, regulators, agencies like Food and Drug Administration in the United States of America, or the European Medicine Agency in Europe, or any national regulator agency. Also, we check in websites from health technology agencies or networks to complement. It helps us to build the questionnaire. The type of document we look at was any document who were related to patient engagement in each decision-making point. So once we collect all the information, we build the questionnaire. The next step was an expert group. Next, please. What we have to do is we have 3 different decision-making points. So we develop one questionnaire for each decision-making point, and also we have to find expert people for one of the decision-making points. So how we select the expert panel? First, what we did is define participant profiles, what we need for setting research priority Delphi, another participant profiles for design clinical trial, and another participant profile for early dialogues. So it was very important to select participants who share particular characteristics for each of these decision-making points, and they need to have the potential to provide rich, relevant, and key information about patient engagement. So the condition, they need to hold experience, knowledge, and expertise in each of the decision-making points they were going to participate. We contact partners within the consortium. They help us to find expert people for each panel. And when we have the information for the partners from the consortium, we check for gaps, which type of stakeholders were still missing after the information they gave us, the partners from the consortium, and search in other European and international institutions, public and private, to complement and to make sure that all stakeholders were representative. So to complement and ensure representativeness of all stakeholders. So when we have the questionnaire and the expert panels, there was 2 online rounds. In the first round, experts have to decide how relevant they were all the criteria that we presented in the questionnaire. And on the second round, they have to prioritize those criteria they found on the first round relevant. Next one, please. So once we have all the criteria, the next stage was to have a meeting. We have 3 meetings in Brazil, one for each decision-making point, one for each Delphi, where participants decided about the final criteria. Next one, please. about the final criteria to assess how patient engagement expectations were met. Next slide, please. So the results in terms of participation we have, as you can see, we have in the initial column was the people who were initially agreed to participate. In each round, you have the number where the people complete the first, the second round, and the third one. Only people who complete first and second round were invited to participate to the round 3, which was the meeting in Brussels. We don't have specific information about why the drops, but the response rate was very high. We have a range from 84% of response rate till 97% of the response rate, depend on the Delphi. So the Delphi team checked for stakeholders' representativeness after the drops to make sure that all the stakeholders, they were still involved in the Delphi. So we found that representativeness were not compromised since there were very little drops and there were still all the stakeholders involved. So it gives this result of this Delphi gives validity to the study result because all the participants, they were in all the decision, all the process. Next one, please. So just focusing on the result of the discussion in the meeting in Brussels, as you can see, we have that there was very relevant for participants anything related with the design of the practice about how the patient needs to be involved in the main objectives of the practice. They have to agree, understand all the stakeholders, or the practice is related to practice based on the assessment of patient needs and preference that is aligned with the result they were found on the survey about this lack of this minimum participation since the beginning on the process, on the patient engagement involvement process. Another result to point out is sustainability. Sustainability, they were the lowest score or the less priority for the expert panel. It doesn't mean that it was not important. It was, but it was ranked as the lowest priority. And that is following as well the discussion of the result of the focus group. One of the discussion in the group that was, it is so early in its use, patient engagement in early dialogues, for example, that to look at long-term sustainability was not yet considered. Our colleagues earlier on mentioned that it is not very clear how to engage patients and when in early dialogue. So it might be led to there is no a long-term vision about the sustainability of this practice. Also, sustainability on the discussion was related to resources. So experts mentioned that because sometimes resources is not up to us, is up to other managerial or other institutions. So it is very difficult to for a practice or for intervention or to be sustainable on the time because it's not up to people sometimes. It's more related to managerial parts. And as well, another issue it was very discussed, important as well, was target population, as it was all the outcomes of the focus group representativeness. It was a really big issue for experts. They mentioned, as it was found in the focus group, that diversity of the patient involved, it was important, and also the voice for the person with a constitution who is going to be about the research. So as you can see, there is much alignment of the result found on the Delphi with the result found on the focus group on the survey. Another issue, it was as well a conflict of interest. Conflict of interest because many expert panel experts who participate in the Delphi came from the Europe or some of them from America. They were a different view about conflict of interest. For one, it was important to disclosure, and it was enough, but from the other partners, it needed to be avoided. No participant who should be involved if they have any conflict of interest. So there was a very range of opinions, different opinions among different stakeholders. And another big issue discussed was as well a feedback of about the participation. Many partners mentioned that it was important that when include patients in any of the decision-making points, the feedback to them about the result, about the outcome, it was necessary, and also not only from the institution, but also it was important a patient gave feedback about the experience, about difficulties, or about anything related to their participation. And that is very aligned as well with the discussion in the focus group that mentioned that sometimes there is communication were not very clear, or one of the challenges it was found on the survey with the stakeholder where was communication were not clear and open. So it was exactly the same that it happened on the Delphi, that about feedback, about being open with everything happened and the results and all the information obtained from the process. So this is a very summary of the result found. Further information about the methodology and the result will be able to be found on the report, but at the moment it's under construction and it will be available on the AMA and Paradigm website. So that is for us. Next slide, please.
Thank you, Maria.
So it is just to wrap up on those results that, in fact, as you can understand, those results will feed and are feeding, or it is ongoing, how the gap analysis is conducted, which really then will spot on what are the needs and expectations on which we need to create the tools to build the capability, the capacity to increase the patient engagement. So it just then it is led by our colleagues from the other work streams. And finally, I just next slide, please. I would like to indeed thank all the multiple partners and active partners we had to be able to provide those results. Of course, from the different Paradigm partner, but also we have set up a Paradigm International Liaison Group within the group gathering international initiatives working on patient engagement, who provide very valuable input and participate in the survey, some of them in the focus groups. Of course, all the respondents, because we had a huge rate of respondents, the participants, the focus groups, to the Delphi, and all who are, generally speaking, are supporting this this movement of patient engagement through Paradigm. So thanks, a huge and warm thanks to all of them and all of you for some of you being on the call.
So thank you, Alexandra. That concludes our information part of this webinar, and now would like to open it up to any questions or discussions that you might have. You can do so by writing your comment or question in the chat of this GoToMeeting tool, or you can unmute your mic and just ask the question. The stage is open right now. If you are calling in and you're not seeing the screen, I think you can unmute your mic by clicking *06. For others, it will be clicking on the microphone icon on there. Do we have any questions or comments?
Hi, this is Estelle Michael from UCB, so a colleague of Alexandra's. And I was just wondering, in terms of the focus groups, so how did you go about selecting those particular groups? Because I was a little surprised not to see sort of an older, elderly patient group. And then also sort of related to that there was no feedback around sort of remote approaches, so patients sort of wanting to be engaged remotely, that travel isn't always so easy. And I'm just reflecting on patients that I know, that is sometimes a real constraint and consideration for them.
Thank you for your question. So for the part of your question about the elderly patients, we did have a focus group consultation for people living with dementia. That was conducted by Alzheimer Europe. We are aware that coming to the location might be hard, and we did offer the online survey for that so that they can participate online. And for those that it was harder to access the online, there was this focus group consultation, but due to time and resource constraints within the project, I'm sure there could have been a lot more to be done to lower the barrier of access for those more remote patients, of course. Anna Diaz, if you are on the line, do you want to add something else?
Hi, Chi, thank you. Yes, thank you for your question. In fact, the consultations were with standing groups. So in the case of Alzheimer Europe, the consultation was with a group, is the European Working Group of People with Dementia. So this is a group who was set up by Alzheimer Europe a few years ago, and this is composed by this, and right now 13 at the time, 11 people with dementia throughout Europe. So it was basically, these were the people who were invited to take part in this particular consultation.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, sorry, and I was meaning more, not so much the people getting to engage in the focus groups, but more, there wasn't just a general message that is a real challenge, and that, maybe engaging patients in the future, maybe it may be more convenient for them to do that remotely, is kind of what I was trying to get to.
Right, and that is a very, very valid comment. Thank you, Estelle.
Thanks.
So we have another question in the chat. I think everyone will see it, but we'll read it out loud as well. So there were, so Annette is asking that there were more than 20 languages offered in the survey, and we got results back for 14. Was there a cultural difference observed in patient engagement? Annette, thank you for the question. Indeed, we offered the survey in 23 other European languages, the reason being that this is a European-funded project. And yes, we got results in only those 14 languages. Now, from what I have interpreted from the results, there weren't too big of a cultural differences that we could really pinpoint those differences out in patient engagement. And these 14 languages that came back were the majority came from the biggest languages in Europe as well. All the results, if you would like to see in further detail, will be in the reports as well for you to look through if there are some specific things that would interest you. I don't know if that answers your question, Annette.
Yeah, no, thank you. This is Annette. I just thought that if there were many questions, I would just put it in the chat. No, the reason why I'm asking is that might be also a role for collaboration with patient associations, is to kind of train the patients to become more vocal. So that is in fact what I was looking at for, let's say, a post-paradigm initiative, is to engage patient associations to make their patients more vocal. So that's why I was asking the question, because this is beautiful. Absolutely,
yes.
congratulations.
Thank you. Indeed, these results actually, we were so interested in doing even more and digging into deeper. But within the scope of this project, it was not possible. So we do encourage, if you're interested to dig into it deeper or use these results as part of your other work, you are free to do so. This is a public resource now in the public domain. You'll find it on Paradigm website, but also as a follow-up from this webinar, you'll get the links to those reports. So thank you, Annette. It is almost 1. I think we will have time maybe for one quick question from Yvette. So the question is, are you planning any more Paradigm activities involving us patient advisors? The simple answer is yes, Yvette. Paradigm, we want to be known for engaging patients, patient advisors, experts, patient advocates in all of the phases and activities that we do. You can find out about future activities, questionnaires, surveys that are coming up from our website, but even maybe more actively from Twitter. We'll make sure to share the Twitter account and handle as well, so that you can follow with these activities. And if you are part of a patient organization that is partner in Paradigm, information will come through them as well. So hopefully that answered your question, Yvette. The rest of the questions, unfortunately, we will not have time to answer. We want to respect the time that we promised with you, so it is a 1-hour webinar. We will, however, collect all those questions that are left and then provide an answer online through a post on the website. So if you have more questions after this webinar, please feel free to send them to comms@imi-paradigm.eu. So that was COMMS at imi-paradigm.eu. Thank you so much for everyone who joined.